I have a friend of mine who pastors in South Florida, and this guy is a great guy, just a dynamic communicator, and just a really humble heart. And he has a motto for his church, and he's put it on T-shirts and coffee mugs and everywhere. And the motto is really simple, but I think it's kind of unique, and I like it. His motto for his church is this: no perfect people allowed. That's good, isn't it? No perfect people allowed. It reminds me of a story that happened years ago, someplace, some say it was in Scotland. It was about two brothers. One was named Christopher and one was named William. And Christopher and William lived in a small village. It was an agrarian society. Everyone was into farming. And they were your typical brothers and typical teenagers for some sorts and some ways. They kind of had a rebellious streak and a wild streak, and they were doing all kind of things in the town and village, and they get into a little trouble. And then they kind of kept upping the ante as far as their risk-taking and what they would do that was kind of sketchy, and they got to a point where they were breaking the law. And actually, in this small town, they began to go out to one man's farm. They were both dirt poor. They went out to this wealthy man's estate, and they began stealing his sheep. Now, that's no big deal to us here today. Most of us don't have sheep probably at home. That would be like going around stealing cars, like Grand Theft Auto. So after having somewhat success, if you would, in their criminal business, they were caught there by the local farmers, Christopher and William, and they were brought to trial. And they were convicted. And I don't know if it started here or not, but the judge there had a unique punishment for Christopher and William. And that is that they had branded on their forehead with like a horse or cattle brand the letters S, ch, T, ch, which obviously meant sheep thief. So as I walked out of this crazy trial, the entire town had gathered and they were saying, sheep thief, sheep thief, sheep thief. Christopher, one of the brothers, was obviously overwhelmed with guilt and shame, and he just ran as far away as he could from that village and from that place, never to be found again. It's interesting. Labels are powerful. Whether someone stole something and you're labeled that and branded for life, or maybe you did something else or someone said something about you and a label was attached to you. You may not wear it on your forehead or on your sleeve, but there's a label inside of your heart and mind that's been branded there, and you feel like it will never go away. ST, sheep thief. What's interesting, though, as you look at life and as you look at stories we find within Scripture and the Bible and within the history of our church, you see many times, and in our own life, that many times when we were running away in guilt and shame, trying to just get so far away from this label, get so far away from the stuff that's been posted about us, get so far away from that, it's at those moments many times that God actually finds us. And that's what happens in our story here today in the book of Matthew. So if you have a Bible, open to Matthew. It's the very first book of the New Testament, Matthew chapter number 9. Matthew, before he became one of the authors of the Bible, also had a label that he had to wear for a long, long time. And let's see what happened to this ST, this sheep thief, if you would. It says, as Jesus went on from there, Matthew 9:9, as Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. Follow me, he told him. And Matthew got up and followed him. Now, I've heard that story many, many times growing up. And to be honest with you, I did not get it. I didn't get it. And then the person teaching the lesson or the retreat would say, and that's what you need to do. Drop everything you have and follow him. Do I drop the soccer ball? Run out of the school? I'm at the office. Get away from the computer. The guy in the beard in the bathrobe told me to follow him. I'm out of here. Honestly, it didn't make much sense to me. I didn't understand it. What was going on? But as I began to study more, I came to find out that this was not uncommon. It was not uncommon for a rabbi or for a philosopher or for a leader to call people to be his disciples, his pupils who he had passed his message on. Socrates had his disciples, Plato, Aristotle, Buddha. John the Baptist, remember, had disciples. So it wasn't unusual that Jesus, as an up-and-coming rabbi at the turn of the first century, was calling people to be his disciples. Here's what was unusual. It's who he picked. Because you see, the draft was over. Peter didn't make it. That's why he was in the fishing business. The draft was over. That's why Matthew was a tax collector. They've been passed over. Imagine, you're waiting your whole life, and maybe I'm going to get drafted. Maybe someone is going to pick me. Someone's going to pick me, and it's the first round. You don't get the call. The second round, the third round. It's like at recess, and they're picking up teams, and everybody has captains, and you're the last person picked, or you're simply looked over. That's what's unusual about this story. And especially Matthew. Matthew was a tax collector. Tax collectors were just absolutely lepers, if you would, in their day. No one wanted to touch a tax collector because he was in cahoots with the Romans, and the Romans were in power over that section of Judea. And Matthew was skimming off the top. People would not want to be around Matthew. They would not want to touch Matthew, even because they would think he was unclean. Jesus saw Matthew. Someone who had been rejected. Someone who had a label, a reputation. And he said, "Follow me." Here's what happened next. Look at verse 10. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" Now, Pharisees, a lot of us know who they are. They were the religious elite of the day. They were highly respected. People worshiped Pharisees. They wanted to be a Pharisee, but today they're kind of the bad guy in the story, known for being a little uptight, slightly legalistic, and downright ornery and mean. They didn't like Jesus, this new rabbi, eating with these sinners and tax collectors. Jesus overheard it. Look at verse 12. On hearing this, Jesus said, "It's not the healthy that need a doctor, but the sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." So the first thing we see here in this passage is someone at work. I kind of like the first section of this passage where Matthew is just sitting there at work doing his job. And what does it say? It says that Jesus saw him. He sees him. And I thought about that. And you know what? God also sees you. You say, "Well, I know he sees me right now. I'm at church." No, God sees you at work. God sees you in your cubicle. God sees you sitting there in your office. God sees you at home with your baby. God sees you in traffic trying to make that sales call, trying to make that appointment. God sees you. He sees you. And not only does God see you, but God knows you. He said, hey, there's Matthew over there at work, and he calls Matthew by name. He calls you by name. God Almighty knows your name. He knows what's going on in your life. He knows the challenges you're facing at work and at home. He knows them better than you do. He knows that. God knows your hopes. God knows your fears. God knows your dreams. God knows you. He has his eye on you, and he sees you just like he saw Matthew. God sees you. It's good to know, isn't it? That out of the 8 billion people on planet Earth, that God sees me as an individual. He knows my life, my work, what I do, where I am at all times. He sees you. And not only does God see you, as we can see in this passage here, but what else does God do? God calls you. He says, hey, Matthew, come follow me. And what do you mean? He didn't mean like, hey, click follow me, like, I don't know, Instagram or Facebook or wherever you follow people on Twitter. No, not that. No, he was saying, come follow my way of life. I'm going to show you a new way to do life. I'm going to show you a new understanding of God. I'm going to give you a new path. I'm going to take that label that you have and I'm going to change it into something and someone else. Matthew, come follow me. Step into this new way of life, this new way of living. That's what he's asking him to do. He already had been rejected, despised, ostracized, not invited, not chosen. But Jesus, as we see as the story unfolds, has this habit, have you noticed that, of picking unlikely people to do extraordinary things. So God not only sees you, God also calls you. He calls you to pattern your life and to follow him in a new way over a long period of time. Friedrich Nietzsche said, the only thing that matters is long obedience in the same direction. Long obedience in the same direction. I know a lot of you listening here today say, hey, I'm in, man. I am a follower. I decided to follow Jesus, as the hymn said, many, many years ago. And that's great. That's fantastic. You're on your way. I'm on my way. But following him is a continual action. It's a continual relationship. It'd be like, if you're married and saying, hey, I love you, I do. And when that changes, I'll tell you. That's crazy. No, you go on and you grow and you recommit yourselves and you recommit your vows and you get to learn how to do life together. So when Jesus calls us to follow him, it's a continual, ongoing relationship. It's not stagnant. He says, follow me. So he calls us. And then look what happens. Look what he calls us to. So you have Matthew. He has this label. He's ostracized. Jesus sees him there at work, calls him, says, follow me. And Matthew goes, hey, I don't know what to do now. What do I do? Man, I've been an accountant my whole life. I'm an IRS guy, right? So what do? I don't know anything about this discipleship thing, this new rabbi, Jesus. I don't know anything. I do know that he's changed my life. I do know that he's given me hope. I do know he's replaced that label with love. I do know that. And I do know that I've got a lot of friends. They're not really, that acceptable either. They're tax collectors like me. They don't get it at all like the other folks, but I know that I can throw a party. So Matthew has this idea. He says, hey, I'll throw a party. That's what I'll do. Can't you imagine? His friends, get that text, party tonight at Matthew's. Woohoo! That's awesome. By the way, Jesus is coming too. All right. Okay. So they show up. Jesus comes to the party. Some of his disciples are there. His friends are there. Because Matthew wants to share his life with them, with his friends. So when God sees you, he not only sees you, he calls you. And when he calls you, he sends you. He sends you. In other words, he wants us to reach out to the people he's put in our world and our influence to make an impact and to make a difference in their life. No matter where we are, no matter what we're doing. And Jesus is so great. He's like, hey, the church is going to be a hospital for sinners and not a country club for saints. It's sick people who need to go to the doctor. It's people who know that they're broke, busted, and disgusted and labeled and guilt-laden and shameful. They're the ones who need God. They're the ones who need Christ, not the righteous ones. I want to be sick, don't you? I want to be sick. I want to be lost. I want to know and claim that, yes, I am a sinner. I have a label. I need to be forgiven. I want to follow him, and I want my friends, my family, everyone around me to experience this same love and grace and hope that God has given me. That's what Matthew does. He used to party like everyone else. Now he knows how to party with a purpose, right? And that's what he's doing. That's what he's doing. Over the years, I've had a chance to speak in seminaries and other conferences with pastors and people who are full-time ministry, also known as clergy. And so I've done this exercise before, and I'm not going to do it here. I'm just going to kind of tell you how it plays out. I'll have a chalkboard behind me, and I'll just kind of open it up to the class. It's very fascinating. These are people who are either in full-time ministry, studying to get a master's in theology, you name it. And I'll ask them the question, hey, let's talk about some of the names of Jesus. There's so many different names of Jesus in the Bible. Let's just list some. And someone will say King of Kings, and I'll write that on the board. Another person will say, of course, Lord of Lords, I'll write that on the board. People will say Lamb of God, I'll write that on the board. Lion of the tribe of Judah, I'll write that on the board. The great I am, I'll write that on the chalkboard. And I'll just Savior, Lord, and I'll write all of these different names that we have, that we understand who Jesus Christ is. And inevitably, in almost every single group, no one will shout out the name that he was most reviled for. Friend of sinners. Friend of sinners. Jesus meets us where we are. He doesn't say, hey, you're a sinner, you're sick, stay that way. No, we come to the hospital to get healed. We come to him so that we can be forgiven, so that we can learn how to combat and battle different sins and temptations in our life. And he wants to change us over time as we follow him and as we desire to make an impact by using our gifts, using our talents to influence others. But we have to make that decision. That one decision. That one challenging decision that all of us have to continually make in order to be sent and be used by God. And that is simply, we have to be open. Openness. Openness to God working in our life. Openness for saying, God, I want to use my life. I want to use my time. I want to use my talents to make an impact and influence others in this life. That's what I want to do. I want to serve people. I want to help people. And that's the most incredible things. One of the most incredible things about our church here at Second. Again, no perfect people allowed. But one of the great things about this place is that we have so many folks just like you that every single weekend and every single day roll up their sleeves and are involved and are making an impact for God and his kingdom every single day throughout the year. It's awesome to be a part of that. At the same time, it's easy to get tired, and we need to hear his call again, and we need to re-engage in helping others and influencing others if we've been sitting on the bench. Because that's where the life is. It's in giving away what God has given to us. Mary Oliver, famous poet, she put it this way. She said, tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? What is it? What is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? He sees you, he calls you, and he sends you to make an impact. Will you answer that call? We say, God, I'm open to serve. I'm open to influence. I'm open to throw parties with a purpose, whatever you want me to do in this brand new year. Maybe you say, I'm not there yet. Maybe pray this. Get honest. I'm open to be open, right? I'm open to be open. God meets you where you are. He meets you where you are. What do you plan on doing? Will you respond to him and his grace? If you remember that old story that we talked about, looked at earlier, of the two sheep thieves, a brother, Christopher. Remember, there was another brother, William. William also had the ST, sheep thief. He is on his forehead, and he moved away and was ostracized from the village. But William heard a different call. He wanted to go back into that village. He wanted to go back to the people he hurt. He wanted to go back to the people he harmed. He wanted to go back to the people he had stolen from and to make amends. And so that's what he did. He went to the cottages, he went to the homes, he went to the farm, and he started to ask forgiveness. He started to do menial labor around. He started to be there. The people in the towns were skeptical at first. They didn't believe it, but he kept doing it. Month after month, year after year. It didn't matter if the villagers were rich or poor. When someone was sick, he was there to bring some soup. When there was a fence that needed to be mended, he was there to help mend the fence. When there was someone who had their horse in the ditch, he was there to dig it out. And he did this year after year for decades. William just served and laid down his life And got his focus off of himself and his shame and the label, and got his focus on others. Until one day, as the story goes, there was a traveler coming through the village there. And they were staying at an inn, and this traveler sat there and was drinking some tea and noticed that there was an old man seated about 10 feet from him, and everybody would come up to this old man and greet him, and young people would go and greet him, and he would laugh and talk and carry on. And this traveler wondered who this person was, this old guy. Was he a former mayor or something? And so he asked the innkeeper, he said, hey, who's that guy, that old man over there? And the innkeeper said, oh, that's old William. He's one of the most respected men in our village. And the traveler said, I noticed there's some kind of faint, letters on his forehead that said ST. What does that mean? What does that stand for? And the innkeeper said, I really don't know. It's been such a long time. And then the innkeeper said, oh, I know what it stands for. Saint. It stands for saint.